Good evening and welcome to our Lundy webinar. I'm Michael Williams, I'm Secretary of the Lundy Field Society. Through the magic of Zoom, it looks like I'm on Lundy at the moment, but I'm not. I'm actually sitting at my dining table in my flat in Cambridge, although I think I know where I'd much rather be. I'm pleased to have you join me for this first online Lundy talk that I hope will connect you with the island that we're all missing at the moment. I say first online talk because I'm trying to put together a programme to have a weekly talk about our favourite island over the coming weeks. But of course, that is reliant on the technology working and enough people being interested in joining us. Before I introduce our speaker, there are a few housekeeping things to mention. Only the microphones and video cameras on my computer and Simon's computer are enabled, so we won't be able to see or hear any of the audience. So that means you don't need to worry about the number of times that you're refilling your wine glass during the evening. Those of you who are on Zoom are able to ask questions using the Q&A function. You need to click the Q&A icon that's at the bottom of your screen and then type your question into the box that pops up. If you're on a mobile, then you can find it on the menu bar. I'll save questions for the end, and depending on how much time there is, because I can't promise that they can all be answered. There's also a chat feature for comments and feedback, which I'll be monitoring during Simon's talk, and I can see there are also a few messages coming in already. If you're watching on YouTube, you're also very welcome, but unfortunately we can't interact with you, so there is no facility for asking questions. The person who's making all of this work for us is Dave Richards, who is at home also here in Cambridge, and he is our Zoom host this evening. I had a number of emails from people who couldn't make this time slot, so if the technology behaves, we'll be recording the whole session and we'll make it available afterwards so that they can catch up. And I'll put the link up on Facebook and email it to LFS members. So without further ado, it's time for me to introduce our speaker. I'm hoping that Simon is going to appear on the screen any moment now. There we go. Good evening. So Simon Dell first visited Lundy when he was 9 years old. He has been returning regularly ever since. He has written 3 books about the island, including one about the Landmark Trust's 50th anniversary of running Lundy, on which this talk is based. He regularly gives talks on a wide range of subjects, from Lundy to policing in Devon, and leads guided walks on Lundy and Dartmoor. So it's my great pleasure to introduce Simon for our Lundy talk this evening. Over to you, Simon.
That's very kind. Thanks much indeed, Michael. And good evening, everybody. What I'll do is I'll just, with the wonders of technology, I'll start my presentation. And there we go, from beginning. And I'm live. Super. Hi there. Nice to see you. And thanks for joining us. My presentation. Michael asked me if I would do the first one because I do quite a few presentations. It's one that I chose about Lundy Island's 50th anniversary. And of course, last year we celebrated 50 years of the National Trust and Lundy being taken over by them along with the Landmark Trust. And so at that time, I published a little book which is going to be mentioned later on, about Lundy and a landmark 50 years. Michael mentioned that I'm a landmark Lundy ambassador and do quite a few walks and talks over there throughout the year. And so my talk this evening is based on that book with quite a few images from it. Of course, Lundy Island, I'm not going to talk about the history of Lundy Island going right back to the days of the heavens, but of course, that's kind of where it starts. And the images that we get from the 19th century, the Tetty boat there, which is a lovely image of delivering stores on Lundy. But it was in 1924 that Lundy Island was purchased by the last family who owned Lundy privately. And Martin Coles Harmon there purchased the island in the mid-1920s because he wanted to. And he owned it and had holidays there. but he didn't live there permanently. But he engaged, of course, Mr. Gade to live there and manage the island on his behalf. It was during the Second World War years that Lundy really did take a battering financially. And I personally don't think it ever really recovered enough financially or robustly to carry on the way they were going. The island started to need a bit of TLC. It started to run down a bit, despite all the efforts of the Harmons and, of course, Mr. Gade, who Michael mentioned. I've been going to Lundy since I was 9 years old, and I met Mr. Gade when I was 9, and I just about reached the belt on his trousers. He was a lovely, delightful gentleman, and he really did inspire me and impress me. And maybe that's where my love of Lundy really started from. My teacher from Appledore Primary School introduced me to him, and she said, "Simon, this is the King of Lundy." And I thought that was rather lovely. Of course, Mr. Harmon Sr., Martin Coles Harmon, passed away in the 1950s, and his son, and he's pictured here, at VC Quarry. He took over management of the island with his two sisters, Diana, who is unfortunately still with us, bless her, and also Ruth, his other sister, who's since passed away. And it was Albion Harmon who really is the last person to mention in the ownership issues of the island. Here we have on the left there Diana talking with Peter, her brother-in-law, and his wife. That's Diana's sister, Ruth. And any of you who know Kerry Strafford, doesn't that chap down the bottom there look like him? That's because that's his dad. It was the death of Mr. Albion Harmon, pictured here with his wife, Kathleen, at the very cruelly young age of 56 in 1968, that really set things in motion for the future of Lundy Island. When he died, his sisters really had to think hard about what they were going to do with Lundy. This image is of Albion in 1967, not long before his death, walking down to the slipway past the TH Stone with his sister, Diana. And when he died, Diana and, of course, Kathleen, his widow, and Diana's sister, Ruth, sat down and thought, well, let's give it a go. And good on them for doing so. They gave it a go. They kept it going, and the hotel kept running. And there we have a lovely image from the 60s. The Lundy Island that I remember, coming up that road, that very rough track. And this is kind of how it was, wasn't it, folks, when we were going across in the 60s into the 70s, and lovely evocative memories from those sorts of images. And the lovely Lundy gannet, of course, was plying its trade. I remember fondly seeing the gannet going over the bar from our home high above Northern Burrows back in the 1960s. And whenever we saw it going across the bar, Mum would always say, "Get the car, we're going down to get some fish." And so we would meet it at the quayside at Bideford. So happy memories of the Lundy gannet. But of course, they tried their best and the hotel leaked, but it was lovely. We loved it dearly, but that something had to happen. And it really was a struggle for them. They managed the hotel, visitors came still, day trippers came still. But as you can see from this image at the back of the hotel, in that corner at the back of Old House South, things are very different then as they are now. The castle was falling apart, and the island really was in quite a state. It was in 1969, in the April, that really the final straw happened. And it was the great landslide, the main road just by Seaview Cottages, if you know where that is, going up the hill from the Limekiln area. The Seaview Cottages, much of that disappeared in the landslide in 1969. And when you look at this image of the landing stage, walk up the hill there, you've got Seaview Cottage on the left. It was that area there where the landslide took place. When you are looking from the sea, as you're looking over the top of the Devonia there, have a look at Seaview Cottage, and that is the area which fell away. That, as we all know, is the lifeline of Lundy Island. And if that road goes, then the financial security of the island finishes as well. There's an image here, and you can see very fresh ground. That's actually after the Landmark Trust had put it straight there. And this one also is just after the Landmark Trust had repaired things. But that was the area of the landslide. And a lovely image here taken from the deck of the Lundy Gannet in the early 1970s. And so hard decisions were made by Diana and also her sister Ruth and Kathleen. And they decided that really they could no longer sustain the island with the significant damage with the landslide. They had to sell it. And so the island was put up for sale in 1969. A document was drawn up and the sale brochure was produced, and here is a copy of it. It's a great social document of what the island was like, the properties were like at the time, what the hotel was like. And I love this image here. Okay, the hotel's lovely, but there's the lovely 2 posts along the footpath there from the church. And also the hotel was detailed in a significant way. The Morisco cottage there on the left of the tavern was detailed. Barton cottages as well, with their now flat roofs and the tractor outside there. Stonycroft, the old schoolhouse and Bramble villas were mentioned as well. Stonycroft looking very sad and neglected. The Blue Bung, as we all know it, again needing a bit of TLC. And there's the late Gilly Lovell, standing outside of the original Brambles as it was built by the Heavens in those days. The old lighthouse as well, looking very dull and again in need of TLC. Little St John's signal cottages over by the castle, and the castle as well. They always amaze me. A wonderful semi-detached buildings there, last occupied by Gilly's father, Mr Dyke, and his wife. And of course, the little cottage on the side, of the castle there was also detailed. The flag house, Hanmers and the Tibbets. Look at the castle there, and look at the flagpole on the right, and there's the flag house down there on the right hand side. That little building was also used for accommodation, believe it or not. Hanmers, again, very tired and looking in need of a bit of TLC. Way up to the north, towards the north end there, is Tibbets that we all know and love, and the farm buildings. The village itself was looking a little bit in need of help. A few people were interested. The Church of Scientology put in a bid for Lundy Island, and they came across to inspect the island. A consortium of Manchester casino owners also came across, and they came over on the boat to inspect the island. But in the background, things were being done, and it was quite clear that the Landmark Trust, the National Trust, ought to be taking it over. They were approached, and they said, no, we can't manage it. There is no long-term financial viability for the island and sustainability. We need to have an endowment. And so our Member of Parliament at the time, Jeremy Thorpe, of course, very distinctive character, an acquaintance of my father, who was a Liberal councillor up in North Devon in those days, he started an appeal fund to raise money for the purchase of Lundy Island to donate to the National Trust. He, along with some other members of Parliament, there's Sir Peter Mills there in the background at a party or a fete of some description, and along with, of course, Dr. David Owen, who came to Lundy last September, and it was lovely to see him at that time. Those 3 MPs together with the gentleman here on the left, John Smith, later Sir John Smith, the director of the Landmark Trust. And here we have Jack Hayward, Union Jack Hayward, later Sir Jack Hayward. And things were going on in the background while the auction was being prepared. And Jack Hayward made it quite clear that he would be prepared to buy Lundy Island, to donate it to the National Trust, and the National Trust said, we'll accept it as long as the Landmark Trust take on the management of it. And Mr. Smith created the Lundy Company that sits very comfortably and securely and safely within the Landmark Trust. And so that's what happened. And the Lundy came up for auction. Jack Hayward gave £150,000 and donated it to the National Trust, who leased it to the Landmark Trust, and it was managed and has been managed ever since by the Lundy Company within it. And there's a lovely image of an envelope there with Peter Mills's signature on it, Jeremy Thorpe there. Good old Lundy, Jack Hayward is writing there. Mr. Hinshelwood the island manager, and of course, very faint signature at the bottom there, Mr. Gade as well. And Mr. Dyke did a lovely scroll, a certificate to Jack Hayward, thanking him for what he'd done. And the first of the Lundy illustrated news that was produced by Mr. Dyke showed that on Sunday, the 28th of September, 1969, the island was taken over, and a wonderful church service, just like it was last year on the 28th of September, took place. And there's Mr. Gade leading the congregation out of the church. I'm told over 1,000 people came to the island that day on board various vessels, and a lovely order of service was produced, and the same image was provided for this past year's order of service as well. And there's a group photograph there, Mr. Gade and dear Mrs. Gade sitting beside him, and some of the staff there from the very first days of Landmark Trust. Mr. Granger just behind Mr. Gade, over Mr. Gade's right shoulder there. Of course, work had to start. Let's not forget that landslide. The road wasn't open, and so work started right away. Here's some of the workers there by the ruins of Seaview Cottage to getting started. And you know, in this day and age, they'd have pumped concrete, they've had JCBs, and they'd have all sorts of swing shovels. There we are, a petrol concrete mixer and 2 men. How about that? And a large slide where the concrete was shoveled down, and it was a labour of love. And throughout a few weeks, that road was reopened, and here we have the tractors coming down on the recently reopened road. You can see very fresh earth, and there from the sea you can see Seaview Cottage there by the earth, along with that chute and the slide coming down to move the concrete. It really was rudimentary stuff, but those foundations are still there, and they must have done a jolly good job to it too. And so the road was reopened, and then the real work started. There we've got the tractor coming down with the blue cob by the look of it, past the TH Stone. The first thing that had to happen was accommodation for the island manager, and it was decided that the old building here, brambles, would be pulled down and replaced. And so it didn't take long to pull it down with a chain and a tractor. I'm told that the chimney took about half an hour with a sledgehammer to bring down. And so a new one was brought over in sections on board the Polar Bear. And that is where the island manager lived for a while. A service ship had to be obtained. Of course, the Lundy Gannet couldn't bring all over that equipment, and so over in Denmark, the Agleo was purchased and renamed as the Polar Bear, that many of us will remember. And there she is at Ilfracombe there, tucked in nicely behind, or rather dwarfing in a way, the dear little Lundy Gannet. And of course, a service vessel needed some way of unloading it, and so Mr. Sheeran built a lovely little craft known as the Sheeran. It had wheels. It was winched up onto the beach when required. And so the winch, maintained by Mr. Davy, was used a great deal in those days. And of course, here we've got a view of Christie's Quay. There's a tractor there. That means it was done. That picture was taken after the road was pushed through, of course. But the Lundy Gannet continued to ply its trade. Customers still came across to the hotel. Many were issued with buckets because of the drips in the roof, but work had to be done. And here we have a lovely image of the dining room in the hotel, which would have been around the area of what is now Old House South. Here we have a poignant, slightly sad image, I know, to a few people, of the Lundy Gannet toodling out of Ilfracombe as the Polar Bear's coming in on her last voyage as she went north to be sold. And that's a cheerio to the Lundy Gannet. And here we have Bob Bendel there on the deck of the Polar Bear, along with woodwork and the buildings that were brought over, all sorts of things were brought over on it, along with the buildings that became quarters. And there's Bob talking to the Reverend Donald Peyton Jones. What a wonderful character he was. I can remember him as a schoolboy when I was at school at Appledore, riding his horse up and down Appledore quayside. An irreplaceable character. And so when you look from the top of the church, we've got a field there, an empty field. That is where quarters are going to be built, prefabricated buildings brought over. They were constructed in Scandinavia and brought over on the wreck deck of the Polar Bear, and young men spent that hot summer putting them up in the 1971. And there they look, very new and pristine, and they were only temporary, you know. And I'm aware that quite a few folks from Lundy are listening in tonight. So if you're listening in from there, I hope it's still standing. And it's a testament to the Landmark Trust that they really are still there. And a little bit of sad news was that Mrs. Gade passed away in the early 1970s. And there is her coffin being taken ceremonially down to the quayside for her funeral. And of course, work had to be done to start demolishing buildings. Mr. Smith decided that the Coast Guard cottages there on the left and also signal cottages needed to be removed because he wanted the castle to be the preeminent object on that headland. And so the decision was made to demolish those. There's John Dyke and Joan, Gillia's parents there, and that's where he published the Illustrated Lundy News for a few years while he lived there. What a fantastic artist. There's the landing bay mural, which is behind the bookcase. If you look at the mural there, look to the right, and you've got the lifeboat there, the lifebelt on the door. That's the door to the current day wheelhouse, for those of you that know the tavern. And of course, he was a fantastic artist as well, and he did some wonderful cartoons. And so in the early 1980s, his cottage was demolished and work was begun on the castle. The castle really was in quite a state. And so a young man came across, a stonemason and a builder, started to put things into order. And still, customers were coming over, day trippers were still coming over. The linhay was being repaired as well, ready for buildings, and there's the accommodation, and it's work in progress. And these photographs here show a lot of hard work by a lot of people under the aegises of the Landmark Trust. And there's the radio room there. The door now is, of course, the window to the toilet, isn't it? And of course, it was smash and bash and burn and chuck over the side in those early days. Luckily now, things are very different on Lundy. And of course, the tractors are driven significantly more carefully now, of course. The barn, intending once upon a time to be a museum, but now, of course, is a great accommodation for big groups. There's the back of the tavern and the quadrangle, and things really started to be demolished very significantly. And there's Old House North and South starting to be appearing from the ashes of the old hotel. And eventually they were constructed for accommodation along with Square Cottage. There's Old House South and North in the distance with work going on. The tavern underway as well. And of course, in 1977, Her Majesty the Queen came and visited Lundy Island on a surprise visit. And there is Sir John Smith seeing her down to the jetty on her way back on board the Britannia, which is there moored out across the other side of Hangman's Hill there, accompanied by a destroyer. It was in 1978 that Mr. Gade passed away, and so end of a significant era. And I would like to pay tribute to the Landmark Trust, who gave him a pension when he retired in 1971. They kept him on Lundy. They gave him a pension equivalent to his full pay. Well done, Landmark Trust. And so work was done on the village. There's the barn under construction and repair. That really was falling down. The North Light, of course, that's freehold to Trinity House. So not under the aegis of the Landmark Trust. But when you look at the North Light, 1979, the last three keepers from the North Light there before it was automated. And there's the man-hauled tramway going up to the big winch and the cableway going down to the sea where the lighthouse keepers would bring up their stores. And what a different view from what it is today. You also have Tibbets, of course, very different to today, and a lovely wall built round outside it. I really never fancied being a scaffolder, and that picture there confirms it. What a feat putting scaffolding up in those days. And of course, work's been going on there. There's Rachel and Charlie there doing the work to the lower light. And of course, lots of school children go across there, and the work has now been completed. There's Nick Diamond, one of the previous wardens on the island, up in the gallery of the lighthouse in the distance with the wind turbine. Wow, early ideas in those days. The water tanks as well, they were put into place. Of course, a great deal of work this past year has been done, certainly by Rolf and other members of the team, to get decent pure water on Lundy. And the castle there in the distance with the South Light in the foreground, again with its own big red derrick there with a cableway going down into the bay, bringing stores up. Oh, there's Jilly and two of the other lighthouse keepers there, and one of her daughters there, who I'm sure is looking in tonight. The church, of course, has had a lot of work done to it over the years, and especially last year, with significant funds coming from the Heritage Lottery and other benefactors as well. And that's an image I remember, the old bells outside of the door of the church a long time ago. But the church, obviously very different now, with a lot of help from the Lottery Fund. It seemed forever that it was covered in scaffolding, but what a fantastic job has been done. And a lot of people working on it. Young Matt there did a great deal of the stonework as well. And inside, work in progress and a building site. Fantastic work indeed. But as things were still carrying on, of course, back in the day, the landing craft were bringing over livestock. The sheep were being sheared. There's Mr. Davy, the engineer on the island in those days, and of course Reg Lovell and Jilly, and I owe a great debt of gratitude to Reg for a lot of photographs, along with Dr. John Watson, who also provided a lot of them as well. Here we have the construction of a government house there, the last building, the last new build on Lundy Island, and of course the back of Milcombe, the staff accommodation and cottages. Things started carrying on as the 60s, the 70s went into the 80s. The new road had to be pushed through, and there's work going on underneath South Light as the new road went around to Christie's Quay. There's the Oldenburg. So there before or after 1986, this photograph was taken. And of course, more landslides occurred, and a landslip occurred on a sailing day for the Oldenburg, so they got the swing shovel down. That is a colossal lump to get rid of before the public arrived, and they managed to get the road clear before the Oldenburg docked. Of course, the Oldenburg came from Germany, and here she is in her original white livery, and there she is coming out of Ilfracombe last year. Plans for the jetty as well. The jetty was constructed in the 1990s. A lot of work was being done in those days. There's the construction of the dive shed as well in the 1990s. I took that photograph there when the new Land Rover fire engine arrived. That was a bit of a bouncy trip for it, without doubt. And West Side Landings, there's Bob Bendell rowing somebody over to Pyramid Rock. A few of you, I'm sure, have landed over at the pyramid on the west side during an easterly gale, and that's how stores were brought up. And of course, the road has always been subject of restoration and ongoing maintenance back in the 2000s, of course. And ongoing maintenance still happens. There's Rachel there up on the top of the scaffolding at the battery, and Charlie doing work to the cannons, and they've done a fantastic bit of work down there, all over the island, in fact, and still are. Well done, you two. And work over, of course, on the battery. Was followed by work over on Brazen Ward as well. There's Sir Anthony Gormley and Derek. I'll leave you to work out which one's which, along with Days 4, which was interesting there for a year, of course. Lundy Field Society always are there, busy in the background supporting Lundy. I'm so delighted to have got that photograph, because there's a lot of special people there who are no longer with us. Myrtle at the front there as well. And also Roger Allen, I see, which is rather lovely. But of course, Myrtle is there with Diana on the right, and still with us and going well. A few years ago in 2015, the Landmark Trust celebrated its 50th anniversary, and many commemorations took place in those days. A wicker man was built as well as part of the commemorations, and I was asked if I was coming over for that weekend. Well, knowing the film The Wicker Man, and I was in those days still serving as a police officer, I had my suspicions why Steve asked me if I would come over. And so I did decline, because I knew what would happen to police officers in Wicker Men. And of course, now a new team. The team is always changing, new blood. People retire, people move on, parts of their lives carry on. And that's about as up to date as you're going to get of any photograph from me. Of course, the Lundy ambassadors, we're carrying on. It's great. That we've now got the Lundy ambassadors also supporting the Landmark Trust with school groups. I feel quite passionately about accessibility onto Lundy, and of course now, which is great news, there are 2 trampers, and this is a lady from the Disabled Ramblers Association who came over with me, and actually she's a very experienced tramper user, and she got down to Jenny's Cove and she saw puffins from sitting in that tramper, which was great. And as we're coming to the sort of the close of the talk, let's not forget the recent dark sky status, and there's a wonderful image, not mine, I can assure you, of the Milky Way over the back of the old lighthouse, which is a lovely image. The current warden, Dean there, who came a few years ago, which is great, and of course assisted by an assistant warden and also volunteers coming over doing the bird counts. 2015 was an important year for the Landmark Trust, but equally it was a poignant year because 2015 saw the passing of Jack Hayward, Union Jack Hayward, the man who I personally feel saved the day for Lundy Island. I was honoured to be present when his son and his partner came across, along with another small party from the LFS and Derek and some others, and Jack Hayward's ashes were spread underneath the Union flag on Hangman's Hill. And so really the last image that I'll sort of show tonight on this talk is an image of Jack Hayward, and simply to say, can I dedicate this talk to a very special guy who was generous and I think saved Lundy Island. And him, along with many other people, past and present, and of course future, have made and will make Lundy work. And while we are sitting here in the safety and comfort of our own homes, in quite challenging circumstances at the moment in 2020, we think of the people over on Lundy, and we are looking forward immensely to our visit back there. So thank you very much indeed, everybody, for listening to this talk, and hope you've enjoyed it.
Thanks very much, Simon. Fantastic talk, and really amazing to see so many photos of Lundy over the last 50 years. We're going to take some questions from the audience. I can see people are writing in the chat saying thank you and clap clap clap. So
you're welcome.
we can't hear any applause.
I can hear it now virtually. Thank you very much. And I can see 141 people are sitting there watching us, which is great news.
Fantastic, yes. So to everybody at home, don't forget, if you want to ask a question, please click on the Q&A button that's at the bottom of the screen and type your question into the box that pops up. While I sort through some of those, Simon, I wondered if you would like to let people know how you can buy a copy of your book.
Oh, have I mentioned the book already? The book is available, and obviously on the island from Sue in the shop. The shore offices also sell it, as well as bookshops around the area. The Landmark over at Ilfracombe sell it, and in Bideford they sell it in the bookshops. And of course on my own website, if you Google my name, you'll find me, and you can get it through my website, and I can devalue it and sign it if you wish. But thanks to a lot of people, I can see 140 people, I bet a lot of you have provided photographs for this book. So it's a tribute to you lot. Thanks much indeed for your support.
Okay, well, we've got some questions coming in. The first one is from Clive Smith, and he says, what, if anything, influenced the new design of old houses and Square Cottage? It seems that the current layout is not at all related to the hotel.
I think really the influence of Sir John Smith, he ran the Landmark Trust, and he influenced a lot of the designing along with his team of management as well. And so he pulled a lot of the strings with regard to what was going to happen. One of the biggest things, and of course using the word controversial is always a bit dangerous, but one of the controversial things was knocking down the buildings around the castle. But he felt strongly that the castle should be the preeminent object on top of the area there. And of course he wanted accommodation, self-catering accommodation as well. So a lot of decisions were taken by Sir John Smith in those days to improve things.
Okay, and sort of on a related matter, I've picked up a question in the chat. Linda Blythe asks, was Seaview Cottage ever occupied? That's the cottage that was fell away, I suppose, when this landslide took place.
It did. The last landslide there in the 1990s saw the back of Seaview Cottages. Dear Mary Gade, a great friend to many of us, of course, greatly loved. She told me that when she was a child, post-war, she would walk up the hill, and that cottage, it had a roof, but it was always occupied by the fishermen. And the fishermen would always drag her in there to give her breakfast of lobster. We fancy having to put up with lobster for breakfast. So it was occupied. It was one of the fishing palaces built by the Sennen Cove and Padstow fishermen when they came over for the fishing seasons. So that, along with Hanmers and other buildings around the island, were the fishing palaces. It was a fishing palace occupied by the fishermen.
Okay, just reading through some of the chat that's coming in here. Chris Williams says, many thanks for this great showing, bringing back lovely memories of my visits with my dad and family in 1984 and 1990. Can't wait to get back. Andrew Larson asks, this might be a question for me, are the bells being rung in the church? Shall I answer that, Simon?
Over to you, you campanologist.
So the bells were put back up in the church tower in 1994. 2 more bells were added in 2004, and the bells are rung very regularly by visiting ringers from all over the country. So I'm a bell ringer myself, and so I make regular trips to Lundy for the bell ringing. So glad we've got a mention of the bells in there.
Well done.
Stephen Hubbard says one of the most impressive bits of work is how Government House is so very reminiscent of Quarter Wall and Quarry Cottages.
I think that the architects who Sir John Smith engaged really did a lot of work there. And of course, when you look at the front of Government House, look at the lintel. The lintel was taken from the middle cottage over at Bellevue Cottages over at near Quarter Wall, and so it was things have been taken out from those buildings to build it, but yeah, very in keeping with the island. I think it's a real tribute to the Landmark Trust because it's a new build that it's so in keeping with the past.
Joanne Wilby says that Sir John Smith at 6'6" refused to have a layer of bricks removed from the wall of the gents' toilet, which would have made it possible for those of a lesser stature to enjoy the wonderful view.
Well, I'm not that tall. I'm only 5'9", and I can still enjoy a nice view. I've got an awful occasion when I took a WI trip over there, but I shan't mention that. There's too many young ladies present.
I've got another question for you, Simon. Grant Cousins says, were the islanders hesitant when the Landmark Trust started a programme on new build, and did they worry that their island would never be the same?
No, I have read nothing to the detriment. Actually, the opposite. They opened their arms. The Landmark Trust were the saviours because it had the backing of Diana and her family, her sister and her sister-in-law as well. And so the Landmark Trust were welcomed with open arms. And of course, a whole new family arrived. The family of the Landmark Trust, the employees also arrived as well. So those who were there from the days of the Harmons, really epitomised by dear Mr. Gade. He welcomed them and he was very supportive of it. And I think a lot of people were saying, if Mr. Gade's okay with it, so are we.
A question from Claire Mitchell. She says, Simon, what is your favourite property or building and why?
Oh, my dear soul. Actually, I guess a lot of people who really know me will know the answer to that. And it's got to be the radio room, because I go over there every November and also March for many years. And you can be rather snug. In fact, there was always the standing joke that I always used to follow dear old James Leonard in there. And so it's a great place as a single person. I'll go for the radio room if that's okay.
Very good, very good. Grant's actually asked another question. It's Grant Cousins. He says, are all the staff safe and well on the island during lockdown, and are they coping okay?
Yeah, my understanding, looking at the frequent Facebook messages and things like that, and I'm friends with a lot of them as well, it's going well, everyone's safe, and thinking of us and thinking of them, and I think we're all looking forward to seeing each other when it's safe and proper and right to do so. And I think that that's very important. We need to make sure we're all doing the right thing and staying safe in these challenging times. So we look forward to seeing you when the time's right.
And just to add to that, I'm hoping that Rosie Ellis, who's the assistant warden, I'm not sure whether she's watching this evening, but I'm hoping that she'll be able to join us in 2 weeks' time to give an update on her role as the education officer and all of the school's engagement work that she does. So that may be an opportunity to hear how life is on Lundy during the lockdown. But more news on that when I can get it organised. Steve Mundy asks a question. Are there plans to either build more accommodation or use the lighthouses or renovate the Quarry Hospital?
Okay. I am aware that some time ago a decision was taken, no more building on Lundy. I'm not privy to confidential decisions and thoughts and plans. I'm not aware of anything at all. Obviously, the lighthouses are freehold to the Trinity House Corporation. I know of no plans in that respect. I was in the North Light with some of the engineers not long ago, and they also echo that. They know of no plans for the lighthouses. So I guess watch this space, or maybe when the time's right, we'll be told.
And just following up on my previous point, I can see a message in the chat from Rosie. She says, hello, yes, all is well here on Lundy. Thank you, Simon, for the talk.
Oh, you're welcome, Rosie. I look forward to seeing you, and give everybody our best wishes, won't you?
Hopefully she'll be joining us in a couple of weeks.
I'll look forward to seeing her when she comes on.
I'm just scrolling through. There's quite a lot of questions sitting here and quite a lot of messages of thanks as well.
Well, I think while you're scrolling there, Michael, looking at the next one, no one's going to thank you, are they? I think we all owe you a debt of gratitude for actually getting this started. Thanks for asking me to do the first one. It's gone perfectly well, and I think the messages that you're seeing on your screen there are a tribute to your enthusiasm and love for Lundy. So on behalf of all of us, everybody else, well done, Anne. Well done, Michael, for what you've done.
Oh, that's very kind of you. It's rather mushroomed from what was a very simple idea about 2 or 3 weeks ago into something where we've had, I think when I looked earlier on, we had about 140 people on Zoom, and there were over 40 people watching on YouTube as well. So it's been a huge audience. I was thinking that we'd be lucky to get 30 or 40 people. So I'm really pleased that we've had such a good audience, a good turnout. I'll go back to the questions. So Stephen Hubbard says, I was interested to see the sled being used at Jenny's Cove.
Yes.
When I landed there during an easterly, all the stores were brought up by hand, Calagas bottles slung over shoulders.
Yeah, the sled, actually, many people will know that I've been a member of some mountain rescue teams, and that is a Thomas stretcher, which was designed by the great Hamish McInnes from the Loch Arbour mountain rescue team. And so it was a mountain rescue sled, which is a lot easier to slide up because it had big sledges underneath it. It could have a wheel if it needed, but yeah, it's a mountain rescue sledge. So that saved an awful lot of manpower getting people up onto the island.
Steve McCausland says, this year we'll hopefully see my 42nd visit. Simon, have you any ideas about how many times you visited?
I'm often asked that one, and in fact, I think I was asked that fairly recently. I usually am taking over groups, school groups, say about 10 a year, with 2 other trips as well. I reckon I must be doing about 20 trips a year. I've been going over there for 50 years. Well, I wasn't doing 20 trips a year all those years ago, but I think we worked out it was quite a few thousand trips over there over all those years. Probably more in the last 15 years since I've been guiding on Lundy Island. So if you multiply 15 by certainly 20, oh my goodness me, that's 300 in the last 15 years. So it's probably 1,000. They all are individual, and I never lose the enthusiasm and love for that special island.
Ali Shepherd has a question. She says, Tibbets has changed quite a lot from the photo in your talk. I've often wondered about the stone H shape outside Tibbets and wondered if there was something else there that was removed. And
yeah, there was.
You know what it was?
There was. It was a lookout at one time, an Admiralty lookout, which was constructed just prior to the First World War, and there were flagpoles there. And signal flags. So that's what the H was. It's paths going out to the flagpoles, signalling to ships going past the north end of Lundy Island.
Andy Chissenden says, question to Michael and Simon. I understood that the National Trust leased the island to the Landmark Trust for 50 years, and that is now up. Is there a new lease in place, or is the National Trust intent on repossessing?
Well, that was quite clearly the message last year, and the lease has been renewed. So the Landmark Trust are firmly there and are obviously the best placed, because I'm aware that the National Trust will not take on a property that does not have a sustainable financial guarantee behind it. And that's the reason why the National Trust leased it to the Landmark Trust, because the Landmark Trust manage the island for the National Trust. I can't ever imagine the National Trust saying we'll have it back, because they wouldn't, I don't think, with the greatest respect to a great charity, be able to manage that like the Landmark Trust do for them. So don't panic. The lease has been signed again by Derek last year, and that's great news for Lundy, great news for all of us.
Yes, and I can just add that my understanding is that a new lease was signed last year for another 50 years. So I think the Landmark's tenure of the island is secure.
Good.
Grant Cousins has asked another question. Are the puffins observing social distancing, or are there lots of pufflings without us natives disturbing them?
I think it would be rude to ask the question, really. You never ask a young lady her age, so I think we mustn't ask the pufflings and the pufflings that question either. But I think from what I'm hearing is they're doing very well indeed. So I think there's the proof in the puffing that they're doing well.
Yes, and hopefully Rosie will be able to give us an update on the puffin situation in a couple of weeks'
yes,
time.
I look forward to that.
Catherine Hall asks, have you been able to count the 14 lighthouses seen from Tibbets?
Ah, Kathy, nice to hear from you. One of my neighbours in Tavistock. No, I never have. I've read that you can see 14 lighthouses from the top of the old light. I have seen the light down at Gadrevi. I've seen obviously Ball Point and some of the South Wales ones. But one thing I have seen from Lundy Island once only, and that is the island of Grassholm. Way over the other side of Skoma, and that was in extraordinary meteorological conditions and a very low spring tide, and a very distinctive island. So wonderful view from up there. But no, Kathy, I'd love to see them.
So we're starting to see the end of the questions coming in now. I'm just going to read out a few more notes from the chat. So this is really the last opportunity to ask a question if you've got one. Robert Musto says the early pictures are astonishing. I did not realize how much rebuilding has been done. I stayed in the radio room last visit. Very interesting lecture too. Thanks, Simon and Michael. And I've rung the bells a few times.
Yeah, the original images, they're all in my first book, Lundy Through Time. So there we are. There's another book as well.
We've got some more questions come in. So Glenys Beardsley asks, will the lack of visitors this year become a burden financially for Lundy?
Well, I guess I'm probably not the person to ask that. I can certainly see that it's going to have a financial effect. It's having a financial effect on my own business, guiding here on Dartmoor, where I live. And so, yes, it's going to have an effect without doubt. I'm quite certain that the management of Lundy, the Landmark Trust, the Lundy company have got contingency plans and are coping well, and they will have strategies in place to ensure that Lundy Island survives. So I have every confidence in the management of Lundy to make sure it's going to be there for all of us.
And a sort of follow-up question is Mike Hall. He says, I did hear that when the new lease was signed, the Landmark Trust might replace the Oldenburg. Could this be the case?
I wonder. The Oldenburg's keel was laid in 1958. That was a good year. And I think that obviously she's needing a lot of overhauling and maintenance every year. She's not going to go on forever, is she? And so I guess maybe in the future there's probably long-term plans. If I were involved in the management of Lundy, and I'm not, certainly the long-term viability of transportation to the island must be a key issue to get the public over there and stores over there. And so therefore the Oldenburg plays a very important, key, pivotal part in that. And so her future, I'm sure, is always being reviewed every year, and how long she might be in service. But she's 61 years old, which is a great age to be, I can assure you.
John Tyra, hello John. He says, do we have any indication as to whether there are more seabirds nesting on the island this year, especially given there are no humans? And I hope Rosie will be able to again update us on that. I noticed that Rosie's also posted in the chat a link to the Lundy Birds blog, so it's lundybirds.blogspot.com. So if you want to keep an eye on what's happening on Lundy from a bird perspective, then do look at the Lundy Birds blog.
Yeah, obviously Rosie and Dean are the people to really ask those specific questions too. They'll be able to answer those, I'm sure, very soon, John. But like anywhere, you know, I live on Dartmoor, and we are noticing a difference here on Dartmoor. When one door slams shut, another opens, and I think that nature is noticing a difference. And so therefore, a place like Lundy, I'm sure, will see a difference this year.
Okay, so I think I'm going to ask the last two questions here. So Camilla Rhodes says, is there any crime on Lundy and how is it managed? Good question for a policeman.
Well, there we are. Back about 30 years ago, I did go to Lundy Island for a crime, which was found to be not a crime. There are a number of old historical records of even in Mr. Heaven's day of an alleged murder on Lundy Island. No, Lundy is pretty crime-free, and all is well. So I know of no crime on Lundy over the last 10-20 years. So a safe place to be.
I think that's how we would hope it would be as well.
Yeah, quite right too.
So final questions from Steve. Is it Simmons or Simons? Trinity House have been undertaking works on the North Lighthouse. What's the current status of the works?
Yeah, I was actually in North Light not long ago with the engineers there. They have been separating the essential part of the illumination and the gallery from the other accommodation part of the building. And so last winter they had to replace a lot of the glass panels, which are unique and are bent, made by Pilkington, a plug for Pilkingtons. And I was chatting on a very windy day. The guys couldn't work out there outside with anything above force 4. So a lot of work is being done to consolidate the North Light to keep it going for the future. There's no plans at all to remove Trinity House's presence on Lundy Island, north or south. South Light, there's better accommodation for the engineers. They're using that. And the North Light, of course, is very separate. So the accommodation is being renovated and I guess probably being used for Trinity House personnel as well.
Okay, thanks, Simon. So I think it's time to wrap up. Thank you again, Simon, for taking the time to join me this evening and join our audience.
Welcome. Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you very much for your talk and for sitting there answering so many questions. Thank you also to Dave Richards, who has hosted the Zoom session and he's kept the show on the road, and he's been answering an awful lot of questions from me in terms of setting this up. The next talk is going to be next Tuesday evening at 7:30 p.m. Andrew Cleave is going to be joining me, and he will give a talk about Lundy's wildflowers. I'll post details on Facebook later and send an email around to LFS members. So that's on Tuesday, the 5th of May at 7:30 p.m. When this webinar ends, those of you who are watching on Zoom will receive an email containing a link to a very short feedback survey. I'd really appreciate it if you could fill it in because it will help me with planning future talks. As I mentioned at the start, we're recording this talk, so we'll make it available online. And that's pretty much it. So Simon, would you like to say your goodbyes?
Cheerio, and hopefully see you all soon on Lundy, and all the very best.
And thank you everyone for attending. I really hope you've enjoyed it this evening, and I hope you can join us again for the next talk. Bye-bye.